The first person I killed was already sitting on death row. His name was Caleb, and on the morning of his final appeal, I carried the evidence box into court while 3 actual attorneys walked ahead of me pretending the box had grown legs. I was 24, 6 months from finishing law school, and technically an intern in Mara's office. In practice, I found missing files, corrected citations, and stood behind people who repeated my discoveries in deeper voices. The courthouse had black glass doors that turned everyone into a reflection before letting them inside. Mine looked cheap. My charcoal suit had shiny elbows. My shoes had survived 2 winters, and my visitor badge was clipped so high on my lapel that it might as well have said temporary human. One of the junior prosecutors held out his coffee without looking at me. I let his hand remain there until he noticed. "You're getting confident," he said. "You're getting cold," I answered. Mara heard me. She did not smile, but the corner of the folder beneath her arm stopped moving for half a second. With Mara, that counted as applause. She was the prosecutor assigned to defend Caleb's conviction against his last challenge. She wore a navy suit without a wrinkle and cut through courthouse noise by walking as if the floor had already been cleared for her. Caleb had been convicted of murdering 2 witnesses for a criminal broker. The evidence was strong, the sentence was death, and everyone expected the appeal to fail. Then the defense produced a statement from a former technician claiming that the most important security recording had been altered. If the judge believed him, Caleb would receive a new hearing. If that hearing went badly, the conviction could collapse. Mara had spent 3 weeks searching for the original storage drive. I found it at 2 in the morning in a mislabeled property envelope no one had opened since the first trial. The recording did more than prove the file was authentic. It captured Caleb's voice before the murders. He was behind a concrete stairwell, speaking to someone outside the camera's view. When the second one arrives, lock the west door. 7 words. Clear, calm, and final. Mara listened once, took off her glasses and asked where I had found it, where everyone else decided it couldn't be. She should have told me not to be smug. Instead, she told me to put on a clean shirt and come to court. That was why I stood at the prosecution table when Caleb entered. He was broad through the shoulders, with a shaved head and a pale scar cutting through one eyebrow. Years in a cell had not made him look smaller. He studied Mara, the judge, and the packed gallery. Then he looked directly at me. He knew. The recording played through the courtroom speakers. The technician folded under 3 questions. The defense attorney stopped objecting because every objection made the recording sound more important. Mara gave the judge the chain of custody documents, but when she explained where the drive had been recovered, she turned slightly toward me. It was a small gesture. Half the gallery followed it. Caleb kept watching. When the judge denied the appeal, he leaned toward his attorney and asked for permission to speak. The attorney tried to stop him. Caleb stood anyway. "That kid killed me," he said. The room tightened. A bailiff touched his belt. Caleb pointed at me. "Not her. Him. He wanted to matter, so he dug until he found the thing that would end me." I expected anger. Instead, I felt recognized. Mara rose and asked the judge to strike the outburst. The judge ordered Caleb removed. As deputies turned him toward the side door, he smiled at me with no warmth. "I'll see you when it happens." Reporters caught us on the courthouse steps. They shouted questions at Mara about the execution date and the recovered drive. One asked who I was. Before I could answer, the junior prosecutor stepped in front of me and described the work as a team effort. I watched my own reflection in the courthouse glass behind his shoulder. For 1 clean minute inside that courtroom, everyone had known the case moved because of me. Outside, I was an intern again. Caleb was executed 11 days later. I did not attend. I told myself I had class, then skipped class and sat alone in my apartment with the television muted. The state released a statement at 10:14 p.m. The sentence had been carried out. The condemned had made no final declaration. At 10:17, Caleb was standing in my kitchen. He wore the same gray prison uniform from the execution photographs. The scar over his eyebrow had become a dark seam, and the overhead light passed through the edge of his shoulder. He looked solid until he moved. Then his body dragged a thin shadow of itself behind him, as if the room could not keep up. I dropped my glass. It broke between us. Caleb looked down. "Still making other people clean your messes?" I did not answer. My back found the wall. He stepped across the broken glass without disturbing it. "You're dead. Excellent legal analysis. I grabbed a kitchen knife. Caleb walked into the blade. The metal crossed his chest without resistance and struck the cabinet behind him. He lowered his eyes to the handle between us. "Objection," he said. I pulled the knife back. My heart was beating so hard that the room seemed to jump with it, but fear was already being crowded by questions. Could he touch me? Could anyone else see him? Why had he come here? Why me? Caleb answered the last one before I asked. "You caused it. The state executed you. The state is a building," Mara argued. The judge signed. "A technician lied, but you found the recording because you couldn't stand being invisible." He moved close enough that his face filled my vision. I felt the chain when I died. "It ended in your hand." I told him to leave. He vanished, not faded, not walked through a wall. One instant he occupied my kitchen, and the next the room was empty. Relief reached me for less than a breath. "Come back," I said. Caleb appeared in the same place. His expression changed first. The mockery remained, but something colder entered beneath it. I had not asked politely. I had summoned him. We tested the rule until sunrise. He could move through locked doors and walls. He could hear people and see ordinary objects. No living person reacted to him. He could travel away from me, although distance made his voice faint when he reported back. He could not lift a coin, press a key, or leave a mark. When I asked a direct question, he could insult the question or complain about me, but he could not give a false answer. Most importantly, death had not cleaned him out. He remembered faces, passwords, routes, favors, arguments, and every secret people had trusted him to carry into the grave. "Who hired you to kill the witnesses?" I asked. Caleb stared through my apartment window at the pale edge of morning. "A broker used the name Finch. Real name? Never knew." "Then give me someone who does." His jaw hardened. He fought the command for several seconds. His outline trembled, and the lights dimmed although his hands remained at his sides. "There was a courthouse consultant," he said at last. "Defense teams loved him because he knew which clerk drank, which deputy gambled, and which juror needed rent. Finch called him from a private number every Thursday. I knew the consultant. Everyone did. He lectured at bar events, appeared on television, and shook hands with judges as if he had approved their appointments. Caleb saw recognition on my face. "There it is," he said, "that little look. You found a use for me." I stepped over the broken glass and straightened my shirt cuffs. "You said I caused your death." "You did. Then apparently you work for me." He rushed forward. His fist passed through my face like cold smoke. I did not move. It was not bravery. I already knew he could not touch me, but Caleb did not know I had understood how completely until his arm emerged behind my head. For the first time, the dead man looked uncertain. I went to work without sleeping. Mara was preparing for an emergency hearing in a separate corruption case. A protected witness had withdrawn overnight, claiming that the prosecution leaked his identity. The defense demanded dismissal. The leak made no sense. Only 6 people knew the witness's location, and Mara trusted all 6. I found her in a conference room tearing yellow notes from a wall. "The consultant did it," I said. Mara did not look up. "Which consultant?" I gave her the famous name. Now she looked. "Proof?" "Not yet." "Then you have a theory." "Give me 1 hour." "No, 40 minutes." She pressed both hands against the table and studied me. There were dark marks beneath her eyes. Losing the witness would not only destroy the case, it would make her office look careless, and Mara hated public incompetence more than private malice. "You are not an investigator," she said. "Then nobody will notice me leaving." That earned me 20 minutes. I sent Caleb through the consultant's office while I sat in the courthouse cafeteria with untouched coffee. The dead did not need elevators. He returned 8 minutes later and described a phone hidden behind a framed award, a handwritten account number beneath its case, and a message arranging payment at noon. I could not tell Mara that a murdered contract killer had walked through 6 walls for me. I needed the information to arrive through a path the living could accept. The consultant's assistant was smoking near the loading dock. I called from a prepaid phone and changed my voice just enough to sound older. "Check behind the Civic Award," I told her. "If your boss gets arrested first, he will say the phone is yours." Fear did the rest. She carried the phone to courthouse security at 9:42. By 9:50, Mara had the account number. By 10:05, an investigator confirmed a transfer from a company linked to the defense. At 10:17, the consultant entered the hearing wearing a blue tie and the relaxed expression of a man who had never been searched. Mara placed the phone on the table. The consultant stopped walking. His attorney called the discovery an outrageous ambush. The judge demanded an explanation. The defense blamed the assistant. Then Caleb appeared beside me and whispered that the consultant had just mouthed the words West Garage to a man in the second row. I wrote 2 words on a note and slid it to Mara. She read them once. Without asking how I knew, she passed the note to an investigator by the rail. The man in the second row stood. So did 2 officers. He ran 3 steps before they caught him. In the West Garage, investigators found the missing witness's replacement identification, cash, and a train ticket. The hearing changed shape in seconds. The defense attorney who had arrived demanding dismissal began asking for a recess. The consultant sat down without permission. Reporters turned from Mara toward the prosecution table, following the note back to my hand. I remained seated. Mara handled the legal argument. She did not need help now. The witness was placed in new protection. The defense request failed, and the judge ordered an investigation into the consultant. The entire courtroom filled with the sound of people whispering while trying not to appear impressed. The junior prosecutor bent toward me. "How did you know about the garage?" Caleb stood behind him with both arms folded. "I listen when people think I'm furniture," I said. Outside the hearing room, the consultant tried to recover his old posture. Cameras crowded him. He announced that the phone had been planted and that a frightened assistant had been manipulated by ambitious prosecutors. I had started toward the stairs when Caleb spoke. "Thursday, room 612, Monarch Hotel." He told Finch the jury would break for $40,000. I turned back. Mara caught my sleeve. "Whatever you are about to do, reconsider it. Do you trust me? That is not the same question." I walked into the press crowd. The consultant saw my visitor badge and almost laughed. I waited until a television microphone shifted in my direction. "Was room 612 at the Monarch also planted?" I asked. His face emptied. "Last Thursday," I continued, "you promised a man called Finch that the jury would break for $40,000. You complained that one juror wanted cash before deliberations." No one spoke. Even the reporters held still. The consultant looked past me, searching the crowd for the person who had betrayed him. Caleb stood at his shoulder, invisible and smiling for the first time since his death. "I don't know what you're talking about," the consultant said. "Then you won't mind when they request the hotel cameras." I stepped away before the questions began. The cameras tried to follow, but Mara blocked them with a statement about the ongoing investigation. I reached the elevator alone and saw my reflection in the steel doors. Cheap suit, visitor badge, steady hands. When the doors nearly closed, Mara slipped inside. "Room 612 was real," she said. "I know." The hotel confirmed he was there. They also have a vehicle connected to the man from the gallery. I adjusted my cuff where she had grabbed it. Then our theory improved. Our theory appeared fully dressed from nowhere. She studied my reflection rather than my face. "Facts have ancestry, Nolan. If you cannot tell me where yours come from, they will eventually make you an orphan." The warning should have cooled me. Instead, hearing my name in that elevator gave me exactly what I had wanted on the courthouse steps: recognition. By afternoon, the consultant was in custody. The protected witness returned. My name appeared in 3 local articles and 1 national legal blog. The junior prosecutor brought me coffee without being asked and set it on my desk. I gave it back. Mara moved my seat into the trial room. That night, Caleb sat on the counter in my apartment, although his body never quite touched it. I opened every article and watched the view counts rise. "You're enjoying this more than the conviction," he said. "The conviction belonged to the office, and the cameras belong to you." I closed the laptop. "Tell me about Finch." Caleb's smile disappeared. He described a network that did not resemble a gang. There were no street corners, colors, or crude threats. Finch connected desperate criminals to respectable people who needed ugly work performed at a distance. The money passed through charities, consulting firms, and private clubs. Judges were not openly purchased. Their friends received jobs. Witnesses were not always killed. Sometimes their children entered schools they could not afford, and gratitude did what violence could not. Above Finch was a man Caleb had never met, but everyone feared naming: Victor. I knew the name. Victor was a financier whose photograph appeared beside hospitals, university wings, and smiling mayors. He wore pale suits, donated after disasters, and owned pieces of companies that seemed unrelated until one followed the board members. Half the city called him generous. The other half lowered its voice. "What does he want with juries?" I asked. "Control is useful even when you don't need a verdict. People who accept one favor can be asked for another. Who connects Finch to Victor? A fixer who hosts dinners at the Meridian Club. A woman in red keeps his schedules. A driver collects phones at the door." The details kept coming. Caleb remembered faces from parking structures, license plates, fragments of conversations, and a private elevator that opened without floor buttons. He had died carrying a map of a city beneath the visible city, and all of it now stood in my kitchen. "You cannot use most of this in court," he said. "No witness, no recording, no source anyone can touch. Ma, no ron city mo benny. I used you today. You frightened an assistant and guessed where a coward hid his bag. Victor isn't a consultant with an award on his wall." I walked to the dark window. Across the street, hundreds of lit apartments stacked over one another. Every room held arguments, passwords, resentments, and private bargains. The living protected themselves with locks because they had never imagined an investigator who could walk through walls. Caleb appeared in the glass beside me. "You still think this is about Victor?" he said. "It is. No, it's about you finding out how many doors no longer exist." I looked at him, then at the city. "Go to the Meridian Club." His outline pulled toward the window as the command took hold. "And do what?" "Listen until someone says something worth a life." Caleb vanished. My reflection remained alone in the glass, but for the first time in my life, being the only visible person in the room did not make me feel small. Caleb returned from the Meridian Club shortly before dawn, with the expression of a man who had discovered that hell was less organized than private wealth. The club occupied the top floors of an old bank. Members entered beneath carved stone columns and surrendered their phones to a driver in white gloves. Inside, there were no posted rules because everyone who mattered already knew them. Caleb moved through wine cabinets, locked offices, and the walls of a dining room where the city's respectable men discussed crimes using the language of inconvenience. Finch had been there. Caleb still could not give me his real name, but he described a narrow man with tinted glasses and a silver lighter. Finch met the celebrity fixer in a private room. Their immediate concern was Mara's corruption case. A record supervisor inside the courthouse had supplied the witness location, and the supervisor expected a second payment after the case collapsed. "Which supervisor?" I asked. Caleb named a man who had complimented my research twice and forgotten my name both times. "Where is the payment?" "Tomorrow, 11:30, flower market beneath the Eastern Rail Line. Cash in a green bakery box." "Who carries it?" "The woman in red." I looked at the clock. An ordinary investigator would need a warrant, surveillance approval, a team, and enough explanation to make everyone cautious. I needed a believable reason for police to be standing near a bakery box at 11:30. Caleb watched me dress for work. "You could tell Mara," he said. "She would ask how I know. You could lie. A weak lie invites more questions than silence." He laughed once. "You say things like that and still imagine you're different from me." And I chose a white shirt and the charcoal suit. "You killed people for money. You watched the articles last night like they were oxygen." The distinction felt less important than it had 12 hours earlier, so I ignored him. At the office, I placed an anonymous tip in the public corruption queue, with enough detail to seem frightened rather than omniscient. I included the time, the market, and the green box. I left out the record supervisor. Mara found the printout within an hour. She came to my new seat in the trial room. "Did you write this? Would an anonymous source sign it? Most anonymous sources do not use semicolons. Then perhaps the criminal is educated." She set the paper down. "I am sending 2 investigators. If they find nothing, you will explain why your face looks so satisfied." At 11:20, Mara and I stood across from the flower market in an unmarked car. She had not invited me. I had entered the passenger side while she was arguing with an investigator and fastened my seatbelt before she could object. The woman in red appeared exactly on time. Her coat was bright enough to be seen through the moving forest of flowers. She carried a green box tied with white string. Our investigators waited until the record supervisor accepted it. They approached from opposite sides. The woman dropped her end of the box, and bundled cash slid across wet pavement among crushed pink petals. The supervisor did not run. He looked toward our car. Then he pointed at me. He told me to do it. Mara turned slowly. I felt Caleb enter the back seat. Never met him, the ghost said. The supervisor shouted that I had promised immunity, that I had arranged the payment, that I was using him to invent a corruption scandal. He produced messages from an account bearing my law school address. The woman in red stepped backward into the crowd. Follow her, I told Caleb without moving my lips. Mara heard only a breath. Her gaze stayed on me while officers brought the supervisor toward the car. Tell me those messages are false, she said. They are false. Tell me you did not know this exchange would happen. I looked through the windshield at cash darkening in the rain. That would be false. She shut her eyes for a moment. One day, you will mistake being correct for being safe. The supervisor was placed in another vehicle. His phone went into an evidence bag. Before noon, technicians discovered that my address had been imitated through a disposable relay. The messages cleared me, but not cleanly enough for Mara. Someone had known the exchange might be exposed and prepared to point it back at the least powerful person near her case. Me. That should have frightened me. Instead, it proved that a hidden organization had reacted to my first move. Caleb returned at 2 with rain passing through his uniform. The woman in red had gone to a luxury apartment, changed clothes, and burned 3 pages in a sink. She then visited a private medical office owned by one of Victor's companies. A man with silver hair left through a rear corridor before she arrived. Victor? I saw him only from behind. What did she say? She asked whether Nolan was a problem. Hearing my first name in the dead man's voice changed the air around my desk. And the answer? Finch told her you were an opportunity. I leaned back. Mara was across the room, directing investigators with her usual precision. No one else could see Caleb standing beside me. No one else knew that the city's hidden network had placed me on its agenda. For the next month, I turned Caleb into the best intelligence service money could not buy. He listened outside conference rooms and inside parked cars. He followed Finch's couriers through staff doors. He learned which shell company paid the records supervisor and which accountant moved that company's money. I never used the facts directly. I let them guide me toward things a living investigator might plausibly discover. A public filing entered under the wrong month, a photograph reflected in a restaurant mirror, a parking receipt inside an impounded car. Mara's case recovered. 3 people accepted pleas. The supervisor admitted selling witness information. The woman in red disappeared before officers could reach her, but her burned pages left pressure marks on the sheet beneath them. A technician restored part of a payment list. My name spread through the office. Senior attorneys began asking me to look at problems they had been carrying for weeks. They did it casually, as if my attention had no value. I started making them wait. June introduced herself after a hearing. She had curly auburn hair, a green coat, and the direct gaze of someone who treated every answer as a door to a better question. You are the intern from the Monarch video, she said. Law student. That sounds temporary. So does intern. She held up a recorder. How did you know the room number? I listen. You said that already. Then your recorder works. June smiled. It was not admiration. She had noticed the shape of my refusal and found it interesting. The anonymous tip at the flower market used a phrase from a memorandum you wrote last year, she said. Reasonable inference, substantial risk. I had written the tip quickly. One familiar phrase had survived. Perhaps my professors have more influence than I realized. Perhaps. You also entered the courthouse 40 minutes before the tip arrived. Caleb appeared behind her. This one is dangerous. I looked into June's eyes. If your story is that a student arrived early, I recommend a dramatic headline. My story is that facts keep reaching you before they acquire parents. Mara's warning, almost word for word. June saw something in my face and stored it away. Then she lowered the recorder. Off the record, powerful people are asking who you belong to. What did you tell them? That I haven't decided whether you belong to anyone. Good answer. Was it correct? I stepped past her. Caleb followed, turning to watch June remain in the corridor. She likes you, he said. She likes unanswered questions. To her, that's the same thing. The attention solved one of my problems and sharpened another. I had influence in the office but still checked my account before buying dinner. Recognition without money was only a better lit form of dependence. Caleb supplied the opportunity. While following Finch, he overheard two executives discussing an unreleased government decision that would destroy a small shipping company. The information had not reached the market. One executive planned to sell at the opening bell. I knew using it was illegal. I also knew no investigator could subpoena a conversation heard by a ghost. I borrowed against a credit card and placed a trade that rose when the company collapsed. I closed it before greed could make the timing grotesque. The profit was more than I had earned in a year. My hands shook after the money settled. Caleb stood across from me in the law school library. Students moved through his body carrying books. Afraid? He asked. Excited. That feeling ruins people faster. I bought a new black suit. It changed nothing and everything. The fabric fell cleanly from my shoulders. The sleeves ended exactly at my wrists. When I entered court beside Mara, the junior prosecutor who used to hand me coffee moved out of my path before realizing he had done it. Mara noticed the suit. Her eyes dropped once to the cuffs. Student loans become generous? I made an investment. In what? Timing. Her mouth tightened. I enjoyed that she was watching closely enough to care. The corruption case ended with a public plea hearing. The record supervisor admitted selling protected information, and the judge asked Mara to explain how her office uncovered the exchange. She gave the investigators credit. Then, in front of a full gallery, she named me. I did not expect the warmth that moved through my chest. Mara did not give praise as decoration. If she used my name, she meant it. Outside, reporters gathered again. June stood at the front. The supervisor's attorney tried to control the story. He announced that his client had been pressured, the payment had been staged, and the mysterious intern had manipulated frightened people to build his own reputation. I let him finish. Caleb appeared beside the attorney and whispered a detail he had learned that morning. The attorney had met Finch in a hospital chapel and promised to blame Mara. I stepped toward the microphones. You met Finch at 7:20 this morning in the chapel at St. Vincent, I said. You sat in the last row, beneath a broken blue window, and promised to say Mara staged the payment. The attorney's prepared confidence vanished so completely that several reporters turned to see whether someone had entered behind him. That is absurd. Then publish your location history. He looked at his phone. I straightened one cuff. You should also ask Finch why he leaves before the prayer bell. The east camera catches the side door. I walked down the courthouse steps. Questions struck my back. Mara called my name once, but I did not stop until I reached the black doors and saw the crowd reflected behind me. The attorney was still holding his phone, surrounded by microphones. June was not watching him. She was watching me. That clip traveled farther than the first. Commentators called me reckless, brilliant, theatrical, and probably doomed. Law students copied my line beneath photographs of broken stained glass. Strangers recognized me at a restaurant and sent a drink to my table. I returned it untouched. The gesture looked better than accepting. My trade profits paid my rent for a year. A second piece of information doubled what remained. I spread later trades across accounts and waited different lengths of time, not because I felt guilty, but because obvious miracles attract auditors. Caleb watched the balance rise. How much is enough? Enough for what? Whatever you're pretending money will finish. I closed the account page. Money buys the right to refuse. You refused coffee when you were broke. Now people notice. Mara assigned me to help prepare a capital murder case. The defendant had managed money for criminal clients and killed a married couple who threatened to expose him. Investigators possessed blood evidence, a weapon, and records placing him near the house. The case could support life without parole. Death required proof that the murders were committed to conceal another serious crime. The accountant would not explain the financial operation. His files were encrypted. His partners had vanished. Without the concealed crime, Mara intended to accept a plea for life. Caleb recognized the defendant from a photograph. He kept Finch's reserve books, he said. Numbers stayed in his head. Never trusted paper. I looked through the interview glass. The accountant sat with perfect posture, silver frames balanced on his nose. He had moved money for killers, brokers, executives, and possibly Victor. If he died because of me, every connection he remembered might return wearing his face. What else does he know? Accounts, market positions, which companies Victor is feeding and which ones he's cutting open. On the other side of the glass, the accountant smiled at his attorney. He believed silence had converted death into life. Mara entered the observation room. "We offer the plea tomorrow," she said. "He admits both murders. No performance, no surprises, no anonymous revelations. The victims deserve a complete case. Do not use them to decorate your ambition." Her precision struck because it was accurate. "He concealed a larger operation," I said. "Then bring me admissible evidence, and if I can, I will try what the evidence supports." She left. Caleb remained beside the glass. "You don't need him convicted. You need him executed. The sentence matches the crime. You were disappointed when she said life." The accountant adjusted his silver glasses. The movement was small and careful. A man who had killed 2 people now believed procedure would preserve all the valuable knowledge behind his eyes. I had spent my life watching important people close doors and call the darkness privacy. Find the crime he was hiding, I told Caleb. And if it isn't enough, I met the accountant's gaze through the one-way glass, though he could see only his own reflection. Then we make the truth easier to see. For once, Caleb did not answer with a joke. He looked at me the way he had when his fist passed through my face, not angry, not yet, but uncertain about how much of me had already changed. I understood his concern. I simply did not share it. Caleb found the concealed crime in a basement that no investigator knew existed. The accountant owned a narrow office building through a cousin. Its public floors held tax preparers and insurance agents. Beneath the parking level, behind a wall painted to resemble old concrete, was a room containing no files at all. There were only framed photographs of people the accountant had helped, ruined, or paid. Caleb recognized Finch in 3 of them. He also recognized the murdered husband wearing a gold cufflink engraved with the symbol of Victor's charitable foundation. The police photograph showed only 1 cufflink on the victim's body. Caleb followed the missing one to an evidence broker who kept trophies from compromised scenes. The broker stored it in a velvet pouch inside a safe. He had taken it before police arrived because the engraving connected the victim to Victor's network. If investigators found it in the broker's safe, they could prove evidence theft and perhaps reopen the financial trail. They could not prove the accountant murdered to conceal that trail. The link needed to speak from inside the accountant's world. I spent a night deciding whether I was willing to move it. That is the version I later told myself. The truth was less flattering. I spent a night deciding how. Caleb stood near the window while I dressed in black and left my phone at home. "You called me a killer for taking money. I described you. What do you call this? Correcting placement." He laughed without humor. Mara would love that phrase. The evidence broker attended a boxing match every Friday. Caleb watched him leave, then guided me through the building by whispering which hallways were empty. I did not walk through walls. I used a service door whose lock the broker had never repaired, because everyone important believed it was alarmed. The safe required a code. Caleb had watched the broker enter it. I removed the cufflink and nothing else. For 3 days, it remained in a sealed pouch beneath a loose tile in my apartment. Possessing it changed the way ordinary rooms felt. I would sit in class discussing professional ethics while a dead man's jewelry waited beneath my floor. The contradiction did not crush me. It made the lecture seem childish. The accountant's impounded car was held in a secured municipal garage. I had legitimate access while reviewing items for Mara. Cameras covered the doors and main aisle, not the narrow space between shelves where personal effects were stored. I placed the cufflink inside a torn seam in the accountant's briefcase. Then I arranged to find it. The next morning, I asked an evidence technician to help inspect the lining after claiming I felt a hard edge. His gloved fingers recovered the pouch. The engraved symbol changed his expression. He called Mara before I had to suggest it. She arrived with 2 investigators. "Why were you checking the seam?" she asked. The weight was uneven. She lifted the empty briefcase. "You noticed that?" "I noticed things." Caleb stood behind her. His contempt was quiet now, which made it heavier. Testing found a trace of the victim's blood in the engraving. The accountant's attorney called the discovery impossible and demanded an inquiry into storage security. He was correct. Mara ordered the inquiry herself. Nothing pointed to me. I had entered with authorization, never approached the camera blind spot alone according to the written log, and asked a technician to make the physical discovery. The broken service lock belonged to another building entirely. But Mara kept looking at my hands. The cufflink opened a path to the basement photographs, the evidence broker, and accounts connecting the murdered couple to Finch's reserve fund. The husband had threatened to reveal that the accountant moved payment after one of Caleb's murders. Concealing that operation gave Mara the aggravating fact she needed. She withdrew the plea offer. The accountant stopped smiling. I should have been satisfied. Instead, I began shaping the witness who placed him near the basement. She remembered a dark sedan and a man in glasses. During preparation, I repeated the detail that his silver frames caught the garage lights. She had never said silver. By the third interview, she did. Mara noticed. "Do not lend witnesses your memory," she said after the woman left. She identified him. She identified a man. "You furnished the reflection. His glasses are silver. Accuracy does not cure contamination." I wanted to ask how many convictions depended on clean people remembering dirty events perfectly. I did not. Mara still controlled whether I sat at the table. The defense discovered that I had participated in the briefcase search and called me as a witness during the pretrial evidence hearing. Their attorney expected an intern who would either panic or become defensive. By then, local cameras filled the back row whenever I entered a courtroom. I wore the black suit. The attorney asked why I touched the briefcase, why I requested the technician, and why I had shown unusual interest in the accountant before the cufflink appeared. "I did not touch it," I said. "I asked a qualified technician to inspect a damaged seam." "Because you somehow sensed an object through leather?" "Because the case leaned left when it was lifted." He raised the briefcase from the evidence table. "Like this? Your right hand is compensating." Laughter moved through the gallery before the judge stopped it. The attorney set the case down. "You enjoy performing for this room, don't you?" I answered the question in front of me. "Did you place the cufflink inside this briefcase?" Caleb stood beside the jury box, his scar dark against his translucent face. "No," I said. The lie came out level. I had placed it inside a torn lining, not the briefcase's open compartment. The distinction would have disgusted Mara. It steadied me. The attorney displayed an access log and pointed to my signature. He suggested I had entered the garage twice. Caleb whispered that the attorney's copy omitted a maintenance entry printed on the reverse side. "Turn the page over," I said. The attorney paused. "The maintenance crew entered between those times. The original log records it on the back. He had not known." Mara provided the complete copy. The omitted entry destroyed the rhythm of his attack. He changed subjects, accusing me of leaking details to the press. "Your own consultant discussed those details in a restaurant last Tuesday," I answered. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because his booth was beside a table of law students. One posted a photograph. Your consultant appears in the mirror. That discovery was real." Caleb had directed me to the photograph, but the photograph belonged to the living. The attorney stared at the screen Mara placed before him. His consultant's reflected face was visible behind a row of smiling students. "Anything else you would like me to notice?" I asked. The judge warned me to limit myself to answers. I apologized without sounding sorry. When I left the stand, the gallery made room before the bailiff asked. June waited in the corridor, green coat folded over one arm. "You never hesitate," she said. "I prepare." Preparation means knowing the likely questions. You know what is printed on the backs of pages you haven't seen. Perhaps he should have read his exhibit. Perhaps you should be more frightened by how good you are at lying. I stopped. June held my gaze, then smiled slightly. "That one landed. You mistake silence for injury, and you mistake attention for immunity." She let me pass. I could feel her interest following me, warmer and more dangerous than the cameras. The judge admitted the cufflink. The accountant went to trial. Mara kept me away from witness preparation but allowed me to sit second chair, because I knew the financial evidence better than anyone else. Caleb whispered connections as defense exhibits appeared. I passed Mara only facts we could anchor to records. The accountant's composure lasted until we displayed the basement photographs. Then he looked toward the gallery, not at the victims' families or reporters, but at an empty seat near the aisle. Caleb stood there. "He used to reserve that chair for Finch," the ghost said. I wrote the sentence on my pad, tore it off, then chose not to give it to Mara. Instead, during a recess, I told an investigator to review old visitor footage. Finch appeared in that same seat at 2 earlier hearings. The living trail caught up. Mara's closing argument was simple. The accountant did not kill because he lost control. He killed to keep control of a hidden financial operation. The cufflink, photographs, reserve fund, and his own encrypted calendar formed a line the defense could not break. The jury convicted him of both murders and found the aggravating circumstance. At sentencing, he looked at me. "Whatever Victor promised you," he said, "you won't live long enough to collect." The statement struck the courtroom like a dropped glass. Mara asked who Victor was. The accountant refused to answer again. The judge imposed death. Outside, the crowd surged around me. Reporters wanted to know whether Victor was the financier, whether the prosecution was investigating him, and why the condemned man had addressed a law student. I saw June lifting her recorder. I saw Mara waiting for me to say nothing. "Powerful men often believe their names are shields," I said. "Sometimes a name is only the next piece of evidence." The clip became the largest one yet. Caleb did not appear until I reached my apartment. "You lied under oath," he said. "The jury convicted on evidence. Evidence you moved. Evidence that belonged to the murder." "And the woman with the silver glasses memory?" I removed my jacket. "Her identification was corroborated. You wanted him dead before you knew whether the case deserved it. He murdered 2 people. So did I. And now you are useful." Caleb's outline darkened. For a moment, cold filled the room hard enough to frost the edge of the window. He could not touch me, but his anger changed the air. "There it is," he said, finally honest. "The accountant's appeals lasted 2 years. Mine did not. I graduated near the top of my class. Mara attended the ceremony and stood apart from my relatives and classmates. When I crossed the stage, I looked toward her instead of the audience. She gave one short nod. I passed the bar. Mara hired me as an assistant prosecutor. My visitor badge became a permanent credential. The first morning I entered through the staff doors, the guard who once searched my evidence boxes greeted me by name. My illegal investments grew. Caleb brought information rarely and carefully, and I turned it into trades hidden among ordinary research. I bought a glass apartment overlooking the river. I filled the closet with black suits that no longer needed to announce their price. June's profile called me the prosecutor who heard cracks before buildings fell. She described my confidence, courtroom instincts, and unclear sources. She did not accuse me. Suspicion attracted more attention than an answer. Mara gave me my own cases. I won them cleanly when cleanly was enough. I discovered that ordinary preparation felt slow after tasting certainty, but I did not use Caleb for everything. A miracle repeated too often becomes evidence. On the morning of the accountant's execution, I told Mara I was ill. She looked through the lie. "You do not become ill, then consider it a first." I watched from my apartment. The state announced the death shortly after midnight. Nothing happened. For 10 minutes I believed my power had been a single accident tied only to Caleb. The disappointment was sharper than grief had ever been. Then a man in prison gray appeared beside the windows. He was thinner than Caleb, with silver-framed glasses and careful hands. The river lights passed through his body. He looked at the apartment, the suit I wore, and Caleb standing near the door. "You," he said. I felt the same invisible chain I had felt only as an idea before. This one was stronger because I had forged every link deliberately. "Tell me the password to your reserve ledger," I said. The accountant pressed his lips together, his face twisted with resistance. Then he answered. Caleb turned away. The ledger opened an empire. The accountant remembered every account he had managed, every company Victor quietly supported, every executive who traded favors for protection, and every market position prepared before public announcements. He understood financial statements the way Caleb understood alleys. One saw where people hid. The other saw where money wanted to run. I tested whether they could work separately. I sent Caleb to follow Finch and the accountant to listen inside an investment committee. Both returned when summoned. Their voices could overlap, but a direct command silenced either one. Within 3 months, I made more money than Mara would earn in 10 years. I never placed a trade immediately after hearing a secret. I built public research around each position, lost small amounts on purpose, and kept my largest profits behind companies that appeared boring. The accountant watched me improve on his old methods. "You will be investigated," he said. "You were caught. I was betrayed. That is what caught people call poor planning." He adjusted glasses that no longer needed adjustment. "Victor notices unexplained success. Victor already noticed me. No, he noticed a loud student. This is different." The proof arrived as a cream envelope without a stamp. It was delivered by hand to my office. Inside was an invitation to the top floor of Victor's tower for a charity gala. Beneath the printed time, someone had written one sentence in silver ink. "Ambition should meet the people who can afford it." Mara read over my shoulder. "Do not go." "Why?" Men like Victor never invite people into a room. They invite them into a debt. Then I will decline whatever he offers. You think refusal keeps you clean? No. I place the invitation inside my jacket. I think it makes the evening interesting. That night, I stood before the apartment glass with 2 dead men reflected behind me. Caleb wore the uniform in which the state killed him. The accountant wore his silver frames, and the expression of someone calculating a loss. Below us, Victor's tower rose over the river in white light. I had once wanted a seat at Mara's table. Now the most powerful man in the city had opened his highest door and was waiting to learn whether I would enter on my knees. Victor's gala began above the clouds. His tower narrowed as it rose, so the top floor seemed suspended over the city by glass alone. An orchestra played beside a wall of white flowers. Executives, judges, actors, and university presidents moved through the room with the practiced warmth of people who had attended one another's celebrations for 20 years. I arrived 7 minutes late, not enough to insult the host, enough for people to turn. My black suit reflected almost no light. Caleb walked at my left, prison gray among evening gowns. The accountant moved at my right, reading the room through company ties, watches, and old financial loyalties. No living guest saw either of them. June did see me. Her green dress was the only strong color in the room. She lifted her glass from across the floor as if acknowledging an opponent. Mara had refused the invitation. This is not a courtroom, she told me. Every expensive room is a courtroom. The rules are simply less honest. Now I crossed Victor's floor while 3 invisible voices described what the living guests wanted hidden. The first man to stop me controlled a medical company. He smiled and asked whether public prosecutors received lessons in tuxedo etiquette. The accountant whispered that the man's company had lost a private drug trial that morning. No lessons, I said. But if I were you, I would leave before the markets open in Tokyo. His smile held. His fingers tightened around his glass. Why? You already know. He departed without saying goodbye to Victor. A university trustee approached next and joked about my courthouse videos. Caleb told me the trustee had paid Finch to frighten a former employee. The East Garage has poor acoustics, I said while shaking his hand. People raised their voices. He released me immediately. The third was a media owner who offered to make me famous if I learned gratitude. The accountant identified a loan hidden inside Victor's reserve fund. You don't own the network, I told him. His pleasant expression froze. Victor owns your lender. You are renting the right to call yourself powerful. I continued toward the windows. Behind me, 3 important men had stopped speaking. Nearby guests pretended not to watch them. Caleb looked almost amused. You waited until each one had an audience. Coincidence. You were downstairs for 7 minutes watching arrivals. Traffic. The orchestra changed songs. Victor appeared at the top of a short white staircase. He was in his 50s, silver-haired and dressed in a pale suit that made every other man appear to be part of the background. He did not demand attention. He paused until conversation lowered around him, then descended through the silence he had created. Power recognized performance. Nolan, he said. Victor. People nearby leaned closer. He placed one hand lightly against my shoulder and turned me toward the room as if presenting a purchase. You have unsettled 3 of my guests. Then invite sturdier people. A few listeners laughed before deciding whether they were allowed. Victor's smile widened. Walk with me. He led me past the orchestra into a private gallery. The dead followed. Portraits of donors hung between windows, each face painted to suggest generosity rather than hunger. Victor offered me a position at a foundation, a salary larger than Mara's, and access to cases that would make my name national. He described it as public service without the restrictions of office. You mean prosecution with selected defendants? Every prosecutor selects defendants. Mara selects by evidence. And you? The question entered precisely. Victor knew enough to suspect the difference between us. I select by potential, I said. He laughed softly. That is why I invited you. Caleb moved close to Victor's face. Ask him about the woman in red. The accountant interrupted from the other side. Ask about North Star Biologics. He intends to destroy it next week. I ignored both. What do you want? I asked. For you to stop pretending ambition is an embarrassing condition. I can give you money, enemies worthy of your attention, and a public that expects you to win. He was offering almost exactly what I wanted. That made refusal more valuable. I already have money. Not enough. I already have enemies. Not worthy ones. And the public? I looked through the gallery door. Half the room was watching us. They are learning. Victor's smile became real for the first time. You think declining me makes you independent? No. I think doing it where everyone can see makes me memorable. I returned to the gala before he dismissed me. The silence lasted only a moment, but it was long enough. June approached as conversations restarted. What did he offer? A job. What did you say? You watched me leave. Walking away can mean yes at this altitude. I took the untouched drink from her hand, placed it on a passing tray, and gave her an answer useful enough to print. Victor collects people who confuse access with power. I prefer doors that open because the person behind them is afraid not to. June stared at me. Do you practice these? Only the true ones. Her article appeared the next morning beneath a photograph of Victor in white and me in black. The city turned our conversation into a rivalry before either of us announced one. Victor responded by sacrificing his fixer. Records surfaced connecting the celebrity intermediary to jury payments, witness intimidation, and the murders committed by Caleb. Mara assigned the case to me. She said I understood the network. She did not say that cameras would follow whoever prosecuted it. The fixer was charming, famous, and certain Victor would protect him. His attorneys filled the news with stories about an obsessed young prosecutor building a career on rumor. I gave them a better story. At the first hearing, the fixer entered through the front doors and paused for cameras. I used a side entrance. He delivered a speech about innocence on the steps while I was already inside asking the judge to unseal a financial exhibit. By the time he reached the courtroom, his own voice was playing through the speakers. The recording captured him promising the record supervisor protection. He recovered quickly. His attorney claimed the voice had been generated. Experts argued. Commentators called the case unstable. June asked during a live interview whether I had built another spectacular accusation around evidence that might disappear. He wants people discussing the recording's technology, I said. Listen to the fear in the room after he names Victor. The network replayed that section. The fixer's laughter ended when someone outside the microphone asked whether Victor had approved the payment. Public attention shifted from the sound quality to the relationship. Caleb and the accountant worked across the city. One followed the fixer, the other listened inside Victor's companies. They returned with more secrets than I could safely use. I selected facts that had living shadows. A private flight led to a customs record. A whispered payment led to a charity ledger. A hotel meeting led to staff footage. Every time the defense sealed one crack, I placed a visible fact beside another until the wall resembled a cage. Mara watched the case grow with pride she no longer allowed herself to show. Your evidence has improved, she said. You sound disappointed. I am waiting to discover the price. The price appeared inside the cufflink file. Mara found that the technician's photograph had been taken 9 minutes after the evidence log claimed the pouch was sealed. The discrepancy did not prove I planted anything, but it created a gap. Only 4 people had access during those minutes. I was one. She closed her office door. Tell me you did not create that evidence. Caleb stood behind her. The accountant remained outside, listening for footsteps. You have asked before. I am asking as the person who put you at my table, and I gave you a conviction. Her palm struck the desk. It was the first uncontrolled movement I had ever seen from her. That is not an answer. It is the answer that survives. Mara looked at me as if the cheap-suited student still stood somewhere inside my clothes, and might be called back. If you poisoned that case, every clean thing it touched is now in danger. The accountant killed them. Truth is not whatever remains after you improve it. I almost apologized, not because I regretted the cufflink, but because losing her admiration felt like losing the first proof that I had risen. Then Caleb spoke. The fixer is moving. I turned toward the door. Mara saw it. Who are you listening to? No one. You look to empty rooms before facts arrive. For 1 second, the entire hidden structure felt visible between us. I left without permission. The fixer believed Victor had arranged an escape. He drove to a broadcast studio, where a friendly host planned to interview him live before a private plane departed. Caleb followed. The accountant confirmed that Victor had canceled the plane and frozen the fixer's reserve account. Victor wanted him to speak publicly, appear unstable, and then be abandoned. I went to the studio. The host welcomed me onto the set because refusing the prosecutor would look worse. The fixer sat beneath white lights, relaxed again. He announced that a key witness had recanted, and that my case would collapse by morning. I let him celebrate. The host asked whether I regretted making the prosecution personal. No, I said. I regret that he has not checked his messages. The fixer glanced toward his attorney. I handed the host an authenticated voicemail recovered through a warrant served that afternoon. It contained Victor's operations director instructing staff to close the fixer's accounts and deny knowing him. The studio played it live. The fixer's face changed slowly. First disbelief, then calculation, then the empty panic of a man discovering that every friend in his phone had received the same order. His attorney stood and walked off the set. The host removed her earpiece. Producers behind the cameras began calling their lawyers. 2 guests scheduled for the next segment left through the rear door. Within 1 minute, the fixer sat alone beneath the lights except for me. Victor said you were noise, he whispered. Victor says many things from rooms he thinks are private. Caleb stood behind him. He can give you Finch. Tell the audience who Finch is, I said. The fixer looked at the main camera. His lips trembled. Then he began. By midnight, Finch's network had lost 12 intermediaries. By morning, the woman in red was in protective custody. The fixer accepted a deal that left him alive but destroyed the respectable layer around Victor. My reputation passed beyond the city. People sent clips of the empty studio with captions about knowing when the room had changed sides. Senior prosecutors appeared on television to explain techniques I had invented in the previous hour. Mara did not congratulate me. June found me outside the studio. You knew Victor canceled the plane before the warrant returned, she said. I guessed he would abandon a liability. Your guesses come with account numbers. Your questions come with conclusions. Then correct one. She stepped close enough that the cameras across the street could frame us together. Did you plant the cufflink? I looked at her green eyes and understood that Mara had not told her. June had found the 9-minute gap independently. Print that question and I will ruin you. She inhaled, surprised not by the threat but by its calm. Is that a denial? It is a forecast. June lowered her recorder. You enjoy frightening people now, only when they insist on clarity. She should have walked away. Instead, she smiled with the same dangerous curiosity she had shown in the courthouse corridor. Victor thinks he can prove your fortune is dirty, she said. The accountant appeared at my shoulder. Ask how. How? Trading records. He says your instincts leave timestamps. For the first time that night, the victory cooled. My accounts were disguised, but Victor knew the positions from which my information came. He controlled people who could select the right trades, remove their innocent context, and present coincidence as a pattern. Across the street, screens above the financial district changed to breaking news. My photograph appeared beside a red market chart. Federal investigators were examining unusual trades linked to a rising prosecutor. My phone began to ring. Mara's name appeared first. Victor had lost his fixer, his intermediaries, and the city's assumption that nobody could refuse him. He did not respond with anger or violence. He made my invisible empire look like ordinary greed. Mara suspended me before I answered her call. She did it in person, in the studio lobby, while reporters gathered outside the glass. Her navy suit was buttoned wrong for the first time since I had known her. Give me your credential, she said. The allegations are 6 minutes old. The investigation is older. I removed the badge she had once placed in my hand. Caleb and the accountant stood behind her like witnesses to a private execution. Do you believe them? I asked. I believe unexplained certainty keeps paying you. That is not proof. You taught everyone to treat timing as proof. She held out her palm. I placed the credential on it. Mara's fingers closed. Do not turn this into another entrance. I looked through the lobby doors. Cameras had filled the sidewalk, their lights flattening faces against the night. They already built the stage. I walked outside alone. Questions struck from every direction. Did I trade on sealed information? Had I used criminal investigations to select companies? Was Victor the source? Would I resign? I descended the steps without covering my face. Someone shouted that I was a fraud. Another called me a criminal. I stopped at the bottom, turned toward the cameras, and waited until the noise weakened under its own weight. Investigate every account, I said. When you finish, investigate who handed you the list. Then I entered a waiting car. My accounts were frozen before dawn. News programs replayed every confident line I had ever delivered and called arrogance evidence. The same commentators who had praised my instincts now claimed they had always sensed corruption. My new suits became visual shorthand for greed. June's article appeared under the title "The Timestamps Behind Nolan's Miracles." It was devastating because most of it was true. She mapped my trades against sealed hearings, government decisions, and Victor's companies. She could not show where my information came from, but she showed that it arrived too early. She included the cufflink gap in one careful paragraph. My phone lost invitations by the hour. Caleb watched from the river windows. You wanted people to notice. They noticed the wrong thing. They noticed the thing you did. The accountant had less interest in irony. He studied the published trading list and identified 3 entries I had never made. The false trades sat inside an account opened with my documents. They were placed minutes before announcements and earned absurd profits. Victor had added obvious crimes to make my careful ones visible. Find the account's living path, I told him. Banks have walls I can cross, not databases I can touch. Listen to the people who can. I sent Caleb to the federal team, the accountant to Victor's financial offices, and myself to June. She opened her apartment door wearing an old sweatshirt instead of green. Papers covered the floor in lines of dates. You should not be here. 3 trades are false. The rest? 3 are enough to break your story. Not an answer. You published before verifying the account opening. Her confidence shifted. I had guessed correctly. Victor's source had provided authenticated-looking extracts, but not the original signature. How do you know which 3? She asked. Because I know what I did. June went still. I had given her more truth than she expected. So the others are yours. The others have research. Research that predicts sealed decisions? Better research than yours. She should have thrown me out. Instead, she pulled a file from beneath a chair. Victor's intermediary had contacted her through a lawyer. The account documents carried a digital certification from a bank officer. The accountant appeared beside me. I know him. Victor paid his daughter's treatment. The bank officer's daughter was treated at Victor Medical, I said. June stared. That isn't public. Check. How do you know? Decide whether being right still interests you. She searched while I stood among the timelines of my own rise. The treatment connection appeared in a charitable foundation report under an abbreviated family entry. June's anger turned away from me just enough. He used me. You were eager. You are still guilty of being interesting before you were careful. She stepped close. One day you will give me a real answer. One day you will stop pretending you want it. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Caleb's voice reached me from across the city. Victor was preparing a charity broadcast at the tower. His board, donors, and media allies would appear beside him. He intended to announce an ethics initiative and describe my case as proof that institutions needed respectable guardians. The accountant returned with a stronger fact. Victor's private blackmail archive was kept in a screening room behind the gala gallery. Advisors entered one at a time to review files before the broadcast. I needed living evidence and simultaneous pressure. June still had access to the tower as press. I asked whether she wanted to correct her article. Correcting is not erasing. Good. Leave the true parts. Destroy the lie where Victor can watch. She understood the shape of the invitation and hated that she wanted to accept. We entered the charity event separately. My suspension did not bar me from a public fundraiser. Security attempted to stop me anyway. I stood beneath the tower's white lights while guests turned toward the doors. If Victor is afraid of a suspended prosecutor, I said, announce it clearly. The guard touched his earpiece. Cameras moved closer. Denying me entry would become the opening image. Victor allowed me inside. He was already on stage, pale suit bright beneath blue screens. The slogan behind him promised integrity without fear. Reporters shouted when I crossed the floor. Victor kept speaking, treating my arrival as a minor disturbance. His board sat in the first row. Caleb moved among them, naming affairs, threats, hidden payments, and frightened children. The accountant stood beside the financial director and recited reserve accounts. June slipped into the screening room with a camera operator. I could not open the archive for her, but Caleb had heard the code and watched which cabinet Victor's advisor used. June found recordings labeled by institution and date. Victor invited me onto the stage. "The public deserves accountability," he said, offering a second microphone. "Agreed. Then explain your trades. After your board explains why you recorded them accepting favors." His smile remained. The audience shifted. The screens behind us changed. June's live feed displayed the archive cabinets. Then it played the first recording. Victor's financial director promising to bury a medical loss in exchange for protection. The man in the front row stood. "Fabricated," Victor said. A second recording showed the media owner taking instructions to destroy a rival. A third captured a trustee asking Finch to frighten an employee. The same men I had unsettled at the gala were now exposed before a national audience. Victor signaled to cut the screens. The feed continued through June's independent broadcast. I turned toward the board. "You can remain seated and let him own your crimes," I said. "Or stand while the public still believes you possess legs." "Might." The financial director rose first. Victor kept speaking into his microphone, calling the material stolen and misleading. 2 directors followed, then 4. The media owner left through an aisle. Donors moved away from the stage. Within 3 minutes, every chair in the front row was empty. I had not raised my voice. Victor stood beneath his slogan while his institution resigned around him. "You think abandonment is victory?" he said. "Tonight it photographs well." I placed the microphone on his podium and walked off stage. Outside, reporters who had called me criminal now shouted for my statement. I passed through them without stopping. June emerged carrying copies of the false account documents. Her correction ran before midnight. The bank officer admitted certifying records he had not seen. The 3 planted trades were removed from the federal presentation. Without them, investigators could prove that my positions were remarkable, not that the information came from an illegal source. They unfroze most of my accounts. The deeper trades remained dirty. I remained free. Mara restored my credential, but not my place beside her. "The archive helped everyone accept the truth," she said. "It cleared the manufactured evidence and buried the real question beneath Victor's crimes." He attacked me. "You sound offended that another person can manipulate a record." She placed my badge on the desk between us rather than handing it back. "I am opening a review of the accountant case. You will end your own conviction, if necessary. And Victor does not make you clean." I picked up the badge. "Clean people do not beat men like him." Mara's face closed. "You once wanted to be seen. Now you think being watched means being obeyed." "Often it does." I left her office with the credential in my pocket. June waited near the elevators. She had corrected her story and published the planted account evidence, but she had not removed the true timeline. "I was manipulated," she said. "I was not wrong about you. That must be comforting. Mara is investigating the cufflink. You tell me things that sound like warnings and hope I mistake them for loyalty. Maybe I want to see whether anything can still scare you." I stepped into the elevator. "Watch tomorrow's press conference." The next afternoon, I stood on the courthouse steps where I had once been blocked by a junior prosecutor. Hundreds of people filled the plaza. Victor's board collapse had made the city hungry for a final contest. I announced that evidence recovered from the archive connected Victor to the murders of witnesses, the reserve fund, and a killing carried out years before Caleb's case. The state was opening a capital investigation. Victor watched from somewhere behind tinted glass. Caleb appeared beside the cameras. "The surviving witness is leaving town." "Why?" "Victor sent him a video of you entering the evidence garage." The crowd waited for my next sentence. I promised that no wealth, institution, or reputation would place Victor beyond the reach of the case. Applause rolled across the steps. Inside my pocket, my phone received a message from an unknown number. It contained a frame from the video. My black-clad figure near the accountant's briefcase, time-stamped during the 9-minute gap. The attached words were brief. "Present your witness, and the city sees what you are." I looked into the cameras and smiled just enough for tomorrow's front pages. Victor believed he had arranged a choice between his conviction and my survival. He had forgotten that I no longer needed every witness to be alive in order to make someone speak. The witness disappeared before sunrise. His hotel room contained an untouched bed, a shattered phone, and enough blood on the bathroom tile to suggest a body had been moved. Victor wanted the police to believe I had silenced the man before he could expose my evidence planting. Mara arrived before I did. She stood inside the doorway wearing gloves. "Your case is over," she said. "There is no body. There is a missing witness and video of you compromising an older case. Video provided by the man he accused. Video that appears genuine." Caleb stepped through the bathroom wall and returned moments later. Blood was poured from a hospital bag. The witness left alive through the laundry corridor. I looked toward the service elevator. Mara followed my eyes. Again. "What?" "You listen to nothing, then know where to look." I crouched near the broken phone. A smear of industrial detergent marked one edge. "Laundry corridor," I said. "Why?" I showed her the smear. For once, the visible clue existed before I needed to invent its ancestry. Hotel cameras revealed a covered cart moving downstairs. The men pushing it changed jackets in the garage. Caleb had already followed their route across the city. Victor's people kept the witness inside a vacant private school scheduled for demolition. I could not send officers to an address supplied by a ghost without explanation. I made a public mistake instead. At noon, I told reporters that police were searching river warehouses. Victor's watchers repeated the false location. 2 vans left the school to assist. Caleb identified a traffic camera that captured one plate. I asked an investigator to trace it through a routine toll search. The van led back to the school through records acceptable to the living. Officers entered at dusk. Victor had moved the witness 10 minutes earlier. Caleb reappeared in my car. Underground parking beneath the courthouse. I almost laughed. Victor wanted him discovered close enough to me that rescue resembled staging. "Is he alive?" "Yes." "Can he walk?" "Barely." The arraignment hearing began in 20 minutes. Victor was expected to appear voluntarily, surrounded by attorneys and cameras. If the witness did not arrive, the judge would release him without the capital allegation. I told the officers to continue searching the school. Then I drove to court. The plaza was full. Victor's supporters carried signs about prosecutorial corruption. My supporters shouted over them. June stood behind a police barrier, watching every arriving vehicle. Victor stepped from a white car in a pale suit. The crowd parted around him. He looked at me across the steps and touched 2 fingers to his cuff, a small imitation of my own habit. He had chosen the location, the clock, and the audience. Caleb whispered that the witness was inside a utility room on the lowest parking level. The door was chained from outside. A living person had to open it. I entered through the courthouse front doors rather than the garage. Victor smiled as if I had accepted defeat. In the lobby, I pulled a fire alarm. The building emptied. Deputies swept stairwells and parking levels under emergency procedure. One found the chained utility room. When the doors reopened, paramedics rolled the witness through the main lobby on a stretcher. Every camera waiting for Victor captured him. I walked beside the stretcher without touching it. The witness lifted a bruised hand and pointed toward Victor. The plaza fell silent. Victor's smile remained, but his eyes no longer shared it. Inside the courtroom, his attorneys argued that the rescue was staged. I produced the toll record, hotel detergent, school footage, and deputy's body camera from the garage. Each visible fact carried the next. The judge ordered Victor held for trial. As deputies approached, Victor looked past me toward Caleb's empty place beside the rail. "Your source has excellent timing," he said. "So does your fear." The capital trial began 6 months later. During preparation, Mara called me into the evidence room and placed the cufflink video on a monitor. It showed a figure in black entering the storage aisle during the missing 9 minutes. The face was obscured. The body and walk resembled mine. "Tell me now," she said. "You know what I will say." "No, I know what you avoid." She placed a photograph of the stolen cufflink beside the screen. "The evidence broker says it vanished before it appeared in our case. He cannot identify the thief. His service camera captured a car matching one you rented." Caleb stood behind me. The accountant waited outside the locked door. "Are you recording this?" I asked. "Would that change the truth?" "It changes my answer." Mara looked exhausted rather than angry. "I thought I taught you to stand when the room turned hostile. I did not teach you to set the room on fire." The accountant was guilty. Her face showed the answer before she spoke. "You did it." I offered no apology. Victor killed people, bought witnesses, and owned the evidence broker. If you expose me now, his attorneys tear apart the current case. That is the choice you built for me. It is the choice that exists. You want me to protect you because stopping him matters more. I want you to decide which result you can live with." Mara stepped close. "And what can you live with?" "Winning." Whatever remained of her pride in me ended there. She did not report the conversation, but she removed herself from the trial team. Her name remained on Victor's witness list. June tried a different trap. She called and claimed that Victor's attorneys had obtained a secret recording from a restaurant. Caleb, listening inside their office, knew no such recording existed. Which restaurant? I asked. The bellroom. Table 9? Silence. You never told me the table, June said. You chose a place where Victor always uses 9. That isn't published. Neither is your source's red notebook. He left it beneath the passenger seat this morning. Caleb had watched the source hide it. June stopped breathing for a second. How are you doing this? I was tired of weaker explanations. When you ask a question in an empty room, June, be certain it is empty. She did not speak again. I ended the call. Fear would keep her quiet longer than affection. Jury selection turned the courthouse into a national theater. Victor entered each morning through the front. I led him. He wore pale suits and smiled at potential jurors as if he were hosting them. His attorneys described me as obsessed, compromised, and addicted to attention. My opening statement contained no speeches about justice. I showed the jury a photograph of the hotel blood, then the witness alive in the courthouse lobby, then Victor's blackmail archive. He does not hide because he is afraid of darkness, I said. He hides because respectable people keep holding the curtain. The first week belonged to Victor. Experts challenged the recordings. Former directors claimed they had resigned under media pressure. The surviving witness admitted accepting money in earlier cases. The second week belonged to the dead. Caleb listened during every defense conference. The accountant mapped each expert's undisclosed financial tie. I never repeated their words directly. I asked questions that led witnesses toward records already admitted. A security expert called Victor's archive videos unreliable. The accountant whispered that his consulting company owed money to Victor's lender. How much of your firm's debt is held by North Lake? I asked. The expert blinked. I don't know. $3.2 million, due in September. The jury looked from him to Victor. An executive claimed Victor never attended operational meetings. Caleb supplied the private elevator code and the food Victor ordered. The caterer delivered the same plain tea to the sealed gallery every Thursday, I said. Would you like to explain who drank it? By the third week, defense witnesses entered court looking at corners. Victor adapted. He produced a surprise witness not listed until the judge ordered disclosure. The man claimed I had paid him to create the blackmail archive. He took the stand with the confidence of someone who believed his past had been erased. Caleb stood beside him and laughed. I know him. He drove Finch, the accountant added. His salary now comes through West Arbor Consulting. The witness had answered only his name when I rose. You drove a black sedan for Finch from March through November, I said. West Arbor pays your current rent. Its sole client is Victor Medical. Before you rehearsed this testimony, you met defense counsel in the private chapel at 6:40 on Sunday. The witness looked at Victor. I haven't asked a question yet, I said, but thank you for identifying the person you expected to save you. The gallery erupted. The judge demanded order. Defense counsel accused me of intimidation. I placed the company's public filing, rental transfer, chapel entry log, and an old traffic photograph on the screen. The witness's confidence collapsed before his first complete answer. June sat in the press row with both hands still on her notebook. Mara watched from the rear bench. Victor no longer smiled. For 1 hour, I controlled every movement in the room. I asked short questions. Each denial met a visible record. Each excuse exposed another relationship. The witness finally admitted that a Victor intermediary promised to clear his debts if he testified. When court adjourned, reporters crowded the hall. I did not give them a line. I walked through the silence I had earned. Victor stopped beside me near the elevators. Caleb always noticed drivers, he said quietly. My body remained still. He had spoken the dead man's name. Many people remember Caleb, I said. Not the way you do. The elevator opened. Victor entered with his attorneys and turned. How crowded is the room when you are alone, Nolan? The doors closed. That night, the defense released the cufflink video. News stations placed my current face beside the black-clad figure. Victor's attorneys demanded dismissal and criminal charges. The judge suspended testimony and ordered a hearing on prosecutorial misconduct. Mara received a subpoena. If she said what she believed, the accountant conviction could fall, Victor's trial could end, and I could become the next person at the defense table. Before the hearing, I found her alone in the courtroom. The jury box was empty. Sunlight lay across the witness chair. "Are you asking me to lie?" She said, "No. That may be the first honest thing you have given me. I am asking you to understand what he will do if this case disappears, and what will you do if it survives?" I looked toward the prosecution table where she had once let an intern sit. "Whatever I can." Mara nodded as if I had confirmed a final piece of evidence. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we find out whether the case can survive both of you." Mara took the witness chair at 9 the next morning. Victor's attorneys expected her to destroy me. The press expected a confession by proxy. The courtroom was so full that people stood in the hall watching delayed screens. I remained at the prosecution table. Mara wore navy. She swore to tell the truth and looked at the defense attorney, never at me. He began with the evidence gap, the service camera, and the rented car. Mara confirmed each fact. He asked whether she believed the cufflink had been planted. "Yes," she said. The word moved through the room. Victor leaned back. His pale suit seemed brighter beneath the courtroom lights. "By Nolan?" the attorney asked. Mara finally looked at me. "I cannot prove who placed it." "Did he deny doing so when you confronted him?" "He did not answer." "What conclusion did you draw?" "That my conclusion was not evidence." The attorney changed direction. He asked whether Mara had removed herself from the trial after confronting me. "Yes." "Because you no longer trusted the prosecutor?" "Because I was becoming a potential witness." "Do you trust him?" Mara's face did not move. "That is not a legal standard. The judge required an answer." "No," she said. I felt the word more deeply than any threat Victor had made. Mara continued before the defense could enjoy it. "I also do not trust Victor. Unlike my opinion of Nolan, the evidence against Victor is before this jury." The attorney objected. The judge struck the second sentence, but every juror had heard it. On cross-examination, I could have tried to rescue our relationship. Instead, I asked whether any physical evidence proved I entered the broker's office, opened his safe, or touched the cufflink before the technician recovered it. No. Did the cufflink create the surviving witness? No. Did it create Victor's archive? No. Did it create the hotel abduction, reserve accounts, recordings, shell companies, or payments to the surprise witness? No. Would suppressing every item derived from the accountant case erase the independent evidence in this trial? Mara looked toward the judge. No. I sat down. She left the chair without looking at me again. The judge spent 2 days reviewing the evidence. He referred the accountant case for investigation and barred us from mentioning the cufflink before the jury. He refused to dismiss Victor's trial because the current prosecution rested on independent witnesses, records, and recordings. Victor had exposed my crime and failed to save himself. Testimony resumed. He changed his defense. Instead of denying the network, he claimed subordinates had used his name. Finch became the missing villain. Directors became dishonest borrowers. Victor portrayed himself as a generous man surrounded by people who converted kindness into crime. The explanation almost worked. The living witnesses had all lied before. Victor had rarely signed anything. His influence appeared between documents rather than on them. Caleb found the first murder. He had been searching old properties connected to Finch when he recognized a loading bay from a conversation years earlier. Victor had brought a young financial partner there before building his public empire. The partner vanished the same night. Police treated it as flight after embezzlement. Victor had killed him personally. Caleb could not touch the dust or recover a body. He walked beneath the loading bay and found a sealed drainage chamber. Inside lay bones, a watch, and the remains of a leather case. I needed the living to discover it without a ghost. The accountant remembered a payment for emergency concrete at that property. I found the old invoice in Victor's archive. The concrete volume exceeded the recorded repair. I gave the invoice to an investigator and asked for ground imaging. The chamber opened the next day. The watch carried the missing partner's initials. The leather case contained metal corners around a rotted ledger. Victor's first reserve account appeared inside. More important, Caleb remembered the phrase Victor used after the killing because Finch had repeated it for years. Control is useful even when you do not need the result. I had heard Caleb say a version of it in my apartment after his death. The accountant reconstructed the payment sequence. Victor transferred money from the dead partner's reserve account into the foundation that launched his public career. The Empire's first respectable dollar had crossed a corpse. We called the forensic accountant, the concrete supplier, and a retired investigator who admitted that Victor's charity lawyer had discouraged the original search. Victor watched his beginning return one bone at a time. During a recess, he asked to speak with me in a holding conference room. 2 deputies stood outside. Caleb and the accountant entered with me. "I know what follows you," Victor said. "Bad decisions?" Caleb used that phrase. "Control without need." He said it whenever Finch spent money merely to own someone. Caleb stood behind Victor's chair, face hard. "The accountant is there too, isn't he?" Victor continued. "That is how you trade. It is how you know companies before their directors." I said nothing. "Do they hate you?" "Most employees do." Victor smiled. "Then you are not a master. You are a crowded room with one living body, and you are a defendant whose oldest partner just entered through the floor. For the first time he glanced down. I leaned toward him. "You built an empire because the living forget. I built mine from people who cannot." His eyes sharpened. He understood. "If I die because of you, I come back. Eventually. Then conviction gives you everything I know. Now you understand why I never wanted a plea." Victor's smile returned, but calculation moved beneath it. "Death is not obedience." Caleb looked at me. Neither of us knew whether a will as strong as Victor's could bend the rule. "We can test that after sentencing," I said. Victor began preparing for death before the verdict. His attorneys introduced the cufflink investigation again through public statements. June published Mara's distrust. Donors returned to the gallery, not from loyalty but because Victor promised files that could ruin them if they abandoned him. The final week became a contest between his last living leverage and my invisible cord of 2. The accountant traced a transfer hidden beneath the partner's reserve fund. Caleb identified the courier who had witnessed Victor leave the loading bay. The courier had spent years under another identity and refused to appear. I did not threaten him. I told him Victor had already named him in a dead man archive as the murderer. Fear brought him to court. He described Victor entering the bay with his partner and leaving alone, blood on one pale cuff. He had helped seal the chamber because Finch promised protection. Victor's attorneys attacked his history. The courier admitted every crime. "Why tell the truth now?" they asked. "Because Victor plans to make me carry his first body after he is gone." The jury understood the pattern. Victor did not merely purchase silence. He arranged for everyone else's guilt to outlive his own. June sat behind the prosecution table during closing arguments. Mara did not attend. Victor's attorney showed the jury my photograph and said the case belonged to an ambitious liar, willing to improve evidence. He asked them whether they could trust any fact touched by me. When my turn came, I moved every photograph containing me off the display. "Do not trust my ambition," I said. "Trust his behavior." I showed Victor's partner alive beside the original reserve ledger, then the bones, the excess concrete invoice, the courier payment, the archive, the abducted witness, and Victor's payments to the false witness. Every person around him was offered the same bargain. Carry one secret, receive one favor, and discover that the favor was a chain. Victor watched me without blinking. He expects you to judge me because he has never survived a room that judged him. I walked toward the jury rail. The cufflink is gone from this case. Mara's trust is gone from this room. Remove my reputation too. The bones remain. The money remains. The recordings remain. The living witnesses remain. Caleb stood beside the jury, broad shoulders and prison gray. The accountant adjusted silver glasses near the evidence screen. Victor cannot explain them without blaming everyone he ever controlled. That is not innocence. It is the final use of the same machine. I returned to the table. No dramatic line was necessary. The visible facts had emptied his pale suit of mystery. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Victor entered smiling. His allies filled the gallery again, expecting at least one juror to resist death. The clerk read guilty on the partner's murder, guilty on conspiracy, guilty on witness abduction, guilty on the murders linked to Caleb's case. With each count, someone left the gallery. By the time the jury found the aggravating circumstances, the seats behind Victor were empty. He turned once and saw it. That was the moment his composure broke, not at the word guilty, not when deputies touched his arms. He looked at rows of abandoned chairs and understood that every living person he owned had calculated a future without him. He faced me. You still need them to die, he said. Only the valuable ones. The judge scheduled sentencing. Outside, the plaza erupted. People climbed barriers to see me. Reporters shouted that I had convicted the city's most powerful man while under investigation myself. I stood at the top of the steps in the black suit Victor had tried to turn into evidence. Mara waited near the black glass doors. You won, she said. We did. Do not give me a share. You kept the case alive. I kept the law from lying about what it knew. That is not the same as helping you. Her reflection stood beside mine in the glass. Caleb and the accountant were visible only to me between us. Will you expose me? I asked. If I can prove what you did. And until then, I will make sure you know someone is still looking. She walked away through the crowd. June approached from the other side. That sounded like a threat. From Mara, it is a promise. Our promise is useful even when you don't need the result. She had heard Victor's phrase during trial. Careful, I said. You are beginning to sound like someone who listens. Sentencing lasted another month. Families spoke. Victor's attorneys presented hospitals, scholarships, and public gifts. The prosecution presented the people destroyed beneath them. The judge imposed death. Victor requested permission to address me. Appeals take years, he said. Use them well. I will. I understood the promise. He would build contingencies, teach living allies what to release, and prepare for whatever shape he took after execution. The audience expected me to answer. I adjusted one cuff. I have waited longer for less. That line followed me into national fame. The office promoted me. Invitations arrived from television networks, universities, and political committees. My real trades remained beneath suspicion, never charged. The accountant conviction entered review, but independent evidence preserved most of it. The cufflink itself was excluded from future proceedings. Mara resigned rather than continue under leaders who wanted to use my popularity. June stored copies of the account timeline, service video, and evidence gap files in a sealed archive. She told me that if she disappeared, the archive would publish. Then remain visible, I said. Is that concern? Asset management. She laughed, though neither of us mistook it for safety. Victor's appeals lasted 4 years. During those years, I caused more deaths. Not carelessly, not often. I selected capital defendants with abilities worth preserving, a digital extortionist who remembered hidden servers, a poisoner with access to private medical networks, a smuggler who knew every unofficial port. I did not fabricate every case. I did not need to. Sometimes I merely refused a plea, found the sharpest evidence, and made certain the jury saw the defendant at his worst. When each execution occurred, a new figure entered my glass apartment. Caleb stopped counting after 7. The accountant built portfolios from the dead. The extortionist mapped private messages. The smuggler followed shipments no customs officer knew existed. My servants stood behind executives, judges, and rivals, listening. I became wealthy enough that financial magazines stopped asking how much and began asking what I wanted. Victor remained the missing crown. On the morning the final appeal failed, the prison delivered his request. He wanted me present at the execution. Mara sent one message: do not go. June sent another: if you go, tell me what you expect to see. I answered neither. At dusk, I dressed in the first perfectly tailored black suit I had bought after Caleb made me rich. In the apartment glass, 9 dead criminals waited behind me. Victor had spent his life making the living kneel through secrets. By midnight, I intended to discover whether death had improved his posture. The execution chamber was smaller than the courtroom Victor had once owned. There were 12 witness seats behind glass. Families occupied the first row. Officials filled the second. I sat alone in the third while cameras waited beyond the prison gates for my reaction. Victor entered in a plain white uniform. Without his pale suit, he seemed reduced for only an instant. Then he looked through the glass, found me, and smiled. 4 years had thinned his face but not his certainty. The 9 ghosts stood behind my chair. Caleb folded his arms. The accountant watched Victor with the concentration of a man awaiting a market opening. The others filled the narrow aisle in prison clothes from different years. No living witness knew the room was already crowded with the executed. Victor's final statement was one sentence. A king is not defeated because he changes countries. The process began. He watched me as long as he could. I did not look away. His chest rose, stopped, and did not rise again. A doctor made the declaration. The official curtain started to close. Nothing appeared. The witnesses left in silence. I remained seated until an officer touched my shoulder and told me the viewing had ended. Outside, reporters filled the night with questions. I gave them no statement. Mara stood across the road beneath a streetlight, hands in the pockets of a dark coat. She had come despite her warning. "What were you waiting for?" she asked when the cameras lost interest. "Closure. Did you receive it?" "Not yet." Her eyes searched my face. "Whatever you believe death gives you, Nolan, Victor spent 4 years preparing to poison it. You still think warnings slow me down?" "No, I think they prove I was present before the damage." She walked away. June waited near my car. "You look disappointed. A man died." "You looked disappointed before the curtain closed." I opened the door. "Tell your archive to be patient. It isn't alive. Then it has an advantage over its owner." I drove to the river apartment. The ghosts were already there. They gathered along the windows, their shapes layered over the city lights. Caleb watched me remove my jacket. "Maybe he was right," he said. "About kings? About not serving." I summoned Victor. The glass trembled. Every light in the apartment went out, though the city continued shining beyond the windows. Cold rolled across the floor. The lesser ghosts stepped backward. Victor appeared in my chair. He was no longer dressed in white. Death had restored the pale suit he considered his true skin. Silver hair lay perfectly in place. Unlike the other ghosts, his edges did not trail. His image was sharp enough to resemble a living man reflected in dark glass. "You kept me waiting," I said. "I arrived where I intended." Caleb moved forward. Victor raised one finger, and 3 newer ghosts turned toward Caleb. They did not obey Victor. They reacted to secrets he had planted while alive. "The poison," the accountant said. Victor had spent 4 years learning the identities of likely future servants. He arranged dead man messages for criminals on death row, offering hidden money to their families if they opposed me after execution. He could not command them, but he knew which desires survived. "Your court has factions," Victor said. "You built it from people whose obedience you never earned." "I do not pay for obedience. Everyone pays." He named one ghost's daughter, another's hidden account, and a third's innocent brother. The apartment filled with overlapping demands. Caleb shouted at them to stop. The accountant began calculating which promises might still be funded. Victor remained seated in my chair. "You collected skills," he said. "I collected leverage." The dead crowded around me. For the first time, my invisible network resembled a mob rather than an empire. I lifted one hand. "Kneel." The command struck the room. Caleb dropped first, one knee passing slightly into the floor. The accountant followed, glasses flashing with river light. One after another, every executed servant bent regardless of anger, bargains, or loyalty. Victor remained seated. His smile widened. Then the chair became visible through his body. His right hand gripped its arm. His outline shook. He had delayed the command for 3 seconds, longer than any ghost before him. He fell to one knee. The glass walls cracked from ceiling to floor without breaking. Lights across the river seemed to bend toward the apartment. Victor looked up at me from among the criminals he had once controlled. "Direct commands," he said through clenched teeth. "You had 4 years and missed the simplest rule. Rules have edges. Then spend eternity looking for one." I ordered every servant except Victor to vanish. The apartment cleared. Caleb resisted only long enough to meet my eyes, then disappeared with the rest. Victor remained kneeling. "Stand," I said. He stood. "Tell me where you placed the dead man archives." His jaw tightened. The struggle darkened the entire room again. Then he began naming locations. There were servers beneath hospitals, sealed letters with law firms, recordings hidden inside university collections, and keys divided among former allies. Victor had prepared financial collapses, political scandals, private confessions, and evidence against people who believed they had escaped him. I made him describe every trigger. By sunrise, I possessed the map of his power. You cannot collect all of it, he said. I don't need to. The dead can be in many rooms. They hate you. Hatred keeps employees attentive. I summoned the full court again. 9 ghosts appeared in a crescent behind Victor. I assigned each a location from his archive and ordered them to observe the living people who approached. Victor tried to warn them about me. Silence, I said. His mouth closed. Caleb stared at him, then at me. The man who once controlled Caleb's killers could not finish a sentence. Enjoying this? I asked. Caleb's answer came carefully. More than I should. Then we agree on something. Victor's archives changed the city without anyone seeing a hand move. I sent anonymous evidence to one regulator and a private warning to one executive. I allowed 3 corrupt institutions to collapse and offered stability to the companies that remained. The accountant used Victor's future plans to position my investments months in advance. None of the trades touched sealed government information. They were simply based on the intentions of a dead financier forced to tell me what he had built. My fortune multiplied beyond concealment, so I stopped concealing it. I created a public investment company and announced that my advantage was superior research. Analysts attempted to copy my positions. They saw only the living surface after my ghosts had already mapped the rooms beneath it. Former members of Victor's network requested meetings. Before each arrived, invisible servants inspected their homes, offices, and private conversations. I knew what they would offer, what they feared, and which person they planned to betray. I rarely needed threats. At one meeting, a bank chair spent 20 minutes describing why I should accept his alliance. Victor stood behind him reciting the man's secret losses. When the chair finished, I slid one sheet of figures across the table. He read it and stopped breathing for a moment. Where did you get this? You came to my office to discuss what I know. He signed my terms without negotiation. At another, a television owner promised favorable coverage. Caleb reported that the owner planned to record me making an illegal offer. I remained seated, pointed toward the concealed microphone beneath a lamp, and asked whether he wanted a better angle. He removed it with shaking hands. Stories spread that I could see through walls, predict betrayals, and hear conversations held miles away. The rumors were weaker than the truth, but they served me. Mara opened a private legal practice devoted to investigating wrongful convictions and official misconduct. She attacked 2 of my old cases and won one. I did not stop her. Every public challenge made my victories look tested rather than protected. June published a second investigation into my fortune. She proved that my information network had no visible employees and no consistent electronic source. I invited her to dinner at the Meridian Club. The same stone columns remained, but the phone collection driver now greeted me by name. Victor's portrait had been removed from the private gallery. The wall behind his old place was empty. June wore green. You own this building, she said. A company owns it. Your company. Then your research is improving. She placed a copy of the cufflink video between us. Mara found the evidence broker. He cannot identify me. He remembers the phrase used during the break-in. Correcting placement. Caleb stood behind June. I said that to you in the apartment. No living witness heard it. The broker could not know the phrase. Victor had planted it through a later message, hoping to create a detail that appeared to come from the thief. Ask when he first remembered it, Victor whispered from my other side after I allowed him speech. I asked. June checked her notes. After Victor's second appeal. A manufactured memory. Convenient. True. She leaned forward. There is something in every room with you. I watched your eyes at the execution. I have watched you listen since the courthouse. For years, I had protected the secret by denying every shape around it. Power had made secrecy feel less necessary. If I told you, I said, you would become more valuable and less safe. That sounds like an invitation. It is a warning. From you, those are usually the same. I smiled. She had survived long enough to understand the language of my world. I did not reveal the ghosts. I told her Victor's archive had continued after his death and that I had obtained it. The statement was true, incomplete, and enough to keep her hunting. She left the cufflink file on the table. My archive still publishes if I disappear, then remain visible. Still asset management? Improved asset management. June left smiling, and Victor watched her go. She will expose you, he said. She will make everyone keep looking. You need admiration. I need an audience. Admiration is one available response. Victor tested the boundary of my control one last time through a living contingency. A week after the dinner, every screen in the financial district began a countdown tied to his old foundation. When it reached 0, sealed accusations against judges, doctors, and executives would publish together. Some were true. Others had been manufactured to make the true ones impossible to separate. The release would not expose one criminal network. It would make the entire city doubt every institution at once. Victor watched the countdown from my office. "You cannot command software," he said. "No. I command the man who designed it." The extortionist ghost remembered the architecture of the release system because Victor had hired him in prison through an intermediary. He could not touch a keyboard, but he led my living security team toward a forgotten backup node beneath the Foundation's first hospital. Caleb followed the technicians Victor had paid to keep the trigger alive. The accountant identified which apparent archive was a decoy by measuring the money spent protecting it. I arrived at the hospital while police, reporters, and frightened administrators crowded the lobby. No one knew why I had come. The countdown showed 11 minutes. A hospital executive demanded a warrant. I named the basement room, the false oxygen cabinet covering its door, and the exact amount Victor had transferred to maintain it. He gave me the key. Inside, my technicians found 3 identical servers. Cutting the wrong one would begin publication immediately. Victor smiled beside me. "Choose," he said. I looked toward the extortionist. "The center server is empty," the ghost said. "The left holds evidence, the right holds the trigger." I ordered the technician to disconnect the right machine. The countdown stopped at 8 seconds. When we returned to the lobby, hundreds of people watched the frozen number on their phones. I walked through the center of them, without explaining how close the city had come to tearing itself apart. Back at my office, I summoned Victor and made him kneel until sunrise. "That archive was supposed to prove you still needed me," I said. He looked up from the floor. "You did. I needed your memory. I did not need your permission." After that, his contingencies became resources instead of threats. The distinction mattered to him more than defeat, which was why I repeated it whenever his pride began to recover. My legal career could not contain the reputation anymore. Committees asked me to run for office. Donors who once belonged to Victor offered national support. I selected the position with authority over prosecution policy and financial enforcement. The campaign announcement took place inside a glass convention hall overlooking the Capitol. Thousands attended, millions watched online. I wore black. Behind the stage, Victor's invisible court had grown to 14. Executions, suicides caused by exposure, and one fatal attempt to escape had widened the rule. Not all of them had been sentenced by me. Each death carried some causal line back to a choice I made. I summoned them before walking to the podium. Kneel. Kneel. 14 figures lowered themselves in perfect silence. Victor knelt at the center. Caleb was first on one side, the accountant on the other. In the dark stage glass, I saw the entire invisible court arranged behind my reflection. To the living audience, I stood alone. I announced that hidden power had governed institutions for too long. I promised a government that knew where influence moved before it became visible. Every line sounded like reform. Every line described what I had already built. The crowd rose. Cameras flashed against the glass. My top donors watched from the front row, unaware that dead criminals stood behind them whispering their secrets. I had begun as a student carrying evidence for people who did not know my name. Now the living competed to place my name above theirs, and the dead could not refuse it. After the speech, security cleared the hall. Staff removed signs and folded chairs. I remained before the dark glass while my invisible court waited. Then a 15th figure appeared. I had not summoned him. He was older than Caleb, dressed in clothes from decades earlier, with rain darkening a coat that left no water on the floor. I did not recognize his face. Every other ghost turned toward him. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled with the familiarity of someone entering his own home. "Still straightening your cuffs when you're frightened, Nolly?" No one had called me that since childhood. Caleb rose without permission. Victor looked from the stranger to me. "I did not cause your death," I said. The new ghost stepped closer to the glass. A pale scar circled his throat. "Not knowingly." Behind him, more shapes gathered in the reflection. Men and women I had never prosecuted. Faces from accidents, ruined companies, frightened witnesses, and choices I had considered too distant to count. The chain had never required a courtroom. It required only cause. The stranger looked past me at the kneeling court. Caleb wasn't your first, he said. He was only the first one you noticed. The glass filled with the dead. I should have felt fear. Instead, I looked at an intelligence network larger than any institution on Earth and wondered how many secrets had been waiting for me since childhood. I adjusted my cuffs. Then start at the beginning.